Good morning and welcome back. This is part of Series 2 of Audit, Control, Governance, Risk and Compliance. In this series, we will be focusing on four aspects, namely the Act, regulations, standards, and frameworks. Hi, I am Savit Vittal Salian. Welcomes you to this series 2. What is an Act? By definition, an Act is a law passed by a legislative body. The purpose of an act is to provide a legal authority or mandate. If you hear something as this is an act in your country, the understanding should be this is something which has been passed by the legislative body of the country. For this conversation, from a technical perspective, the Information Technology Act of 2000 in India, it's an act, but it is not restricted to just the act that I gave. It is any act. Look around, and if you see here which states it's an act, go with it that it is passed by the local legislative body. A regulation, by definition, it is rules made by a regulatory authority under the authority of an act. The regulation requires an act to support it. The purpose of a regulation is detailing how the provision of an act are to be followed. Again, a regulation flows down from the act. An act is needed for a regulation to be implemented. Regulation looks at acts for reference. In this case, as example, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, issued under the EU law. Having said that, you can look at your area, your space, region and country, and look at the word regulation. If you see a regulation being stated, it means it is something which has been derived because an act was passed, and a regulation defines how those act has to be implemented in detail. That's regulation. Standards. Well, take standards as the word as it is, standards, maintaining a standard. It's by definition, it's an agreed upon norm, guidelines or requirement developed by a recognized body. You might have a standard for banking, you might have a standard for medicine, you might have a standard for products. It could be electronic products, it could be any other products that in use. You take a product, it's most likely on the back of the product there might be a standard being referenced to as per XYZ standards. A standard, the purpose of the standard is to promote consistency and quality, often voluntary unless mandated. An example of this would be an ISI standards which has been used in country, which indicates that certain testings has been done and it is according to the standards. Again, the very easy way to understand a standard is to look at a product, turn the back, on the cover there would be various references, numbers, or straightforward it would mention this is as per this standard. That's a standard. For this conversation, as an example, we have taken something which we will be using, the ISO 27001 Information Security and Management Standards. So ISO is also a standard. It has group of standards catering to certain businesses or multiple businesses. Do note, a standard is defined by a body put in place by a potential regulation or a potential act. This is the body which would be defining the standards. But do note, a standard is independent and generally done by a subject matter group or expertise. A framework. By definition, a framework is a structured set of practices and guidelines to manage the process or achieve specific goals. The purpose is to implement the controls, manage risk, or ensure compliance. Example of a framework is the NIST cybersecurity framework. Do note the word set of practices and guidelines. It's a guidelines, very similar to standards. It is important to understand that From a top, a standard and a framework might have similarities. But as we go into details, you'll see the difference. At this point of time, let's hold with it that these two are separate with some very specific differences. Overall, an act is a law passed by a legislative body. A regulation derives its power through an act. These are interlinked. Do note, an act might trigger off multiple regulations. A standard could be product based, theme based, could have multiple categories in itself. To understand all the four together, you can reference the screen. It gives you a clear view. From an authority perspective, an act is authored or derives itself from the legislative body. A regulation is from a regulatory agency. A standards are from a standards organization. A framework is defined by industry bodies and experts of that industry. An act is mandatory, regulations mandatory, standards are mostly optional, or it can also be made mandatory, but depends on the usage and the interpretation. Framework is optional, it's basically guidelines, flexible enough to suit an industry. A particular framework might be used by, say, a banking in its partial form. Some might use it 80% of the framework might be used, some might use 20%, or they might use combination of framework for its implementation. So that's where the flexibility comes in. From a detailing perspective, an act is high level. Regulations goes a little deeper. It's operational and it details the act. A standard is technical and precise. This is something that you would understand it better as I gave an example earlier. Look at your product, pick up your phone. As an example, let's look at iPhone manufacturing in India. If an iPhone has to be manufactured in India, they have to follow regulations defined by the Act, not only for iPhone but overall for any manufacturing of electronic goods. There is a regulation which includes compliance to the Bureau of Indian Standards or BIS. Hence, there is a regulation requiring it to be compliant with BIS standards. So regulation and compliance, it derives its power from an act which would have been passed by the parliament. It should be very at a top view, not just for a product like phone, but for many other electronic goods which is manufactured in the country. So the standard here is the BIS standard. It's for product quality and safety. It would also include environmental clearance from Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climatic Change, and adherence to the e-waste management rule of 2022. So how would a standard look like? From a BIS certification perspective, this is a mandatory compliance. Electronic manufacturer in India must comply with BIS requirement, which ensures the quality and the safety of the product. They would have to go through a product assessment, need to be assessed by BIS recognized labs and submit the test reports along with the application for the registration. Upon successful registration, manufacturer need to use the BIS standard mark on the product, packaging and promotional material. The BIS checks the quality and the standard of the product from the point of view of health, safety, environment, prevention of deceptive practices, consumer security, etc. Now pause here, think through, where have you seen the BIS mark if you are in the country? In India, just look at the laptop that you are using this video for viewing, or your mobile or your TV or any electronics medium that you are currently using. On the back of it there would be a reference of BIS or sticker or the box that would have come with it, or the instruction manual. It would be either in the first page or the last page of it. So that's how the standard looks like. For reference, look at this space. These are some of the symbols representing BSI and few other standards that's used in India. From detailing perspective, the act is kept at a high level, a very broad brush. The regulations gives details, but still at the top, but points to certain directions, or in most cases points towards a standard. The standard is very technical in nature, wherein specifics are listed, points are listed against which the product or the process need to follow. Framework is flexible and broad. The body which defines the act is the Parliament or the Congress. The regulation example here is the EU Commission, SEBI in India, and similar such that you might have in your own country. Standards are universal mostly across geographies like the ISO or IEC. Framework again is broad across geographies, generally followed as best practices. We know about NIST, we know about COBIT, we know about ITIL. Just stepping back, an act would generally be country specific, or in this case of EU, a region, a union. In this case, the whole of Europe is covered. Certain act might be global in nature, so we have to be aware of the difference. The standards and framework are generally global in nature, used, and the benefits are taken across. But yes, the act and regulation, an act in specific, is generally very localized, country, and in some cases region, rare, global in nature. Act. Let us look at some of the examples of it. Let's look at the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, very localized for India. The purpose of it is to govern banking companies in India, and it's enforced by the Reserve Bank of India. This act was passed by the Parliament. Similarly, for US, it's the Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, also known as GLBA. The purpose of this act was to protect the consumer financial privacy and enforced by the US federal agency. The next is SOX, or the Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. So the act was passed in US for ensuring financial transparency and accountability and applicable to financial institutions. This is an act which needs to be adhered to by any company across the globe dealing with businesses in US. So an overreaching act. So this helps with some context on how an act looks like. You might get a better picture about the perspective from this angle. From regulations perspective, we have taken three examples. First one is the Basel III. The purpose is to set capital and liquidity standards. The body in this case is Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. Again, this regulation is followed across the globe. The next is the RBI. It regulates instruction on risk, lending, KYC, etc. This is from Reserve Bank of India, hence localized to the country. It can also be global if any global companies or banking has presence in India or requires to do business in India. The next is again country specific, the CBLODR, or listing obligations and disclosure requirement. This is applicable for all listed financial entities. SEBI governs it. That gives you a perspective of how a regulation looks like. From standards perspective, or this should be familiar with for most of us in the field of IT or banking. The first one is the ISO 27001. The purpose of this was specific to the information security management system, applies to banks, insurance companies, NBFCs, which is non-banking financial corporations, companies, etc. Next is the PCI DSS. This is very specific to the card holder data, securing it, applicable to banks, payment gateways, e-wallets, or anyone in this space. The next is the International Financial Reporting Standards. The purpose is about financial reporting and disclosure, applicable to the global BFSI entities. From a framework perspective, again we will be aware or maybe already engaged with some of them, if not all. The first one is the COBIT. Its purpose is specific to IT governance and controls. Common use is risk and control management in IT departments. NIST cybersecurity framework. It's about managing cybersecurity risk, used again by banking, insurance, and at this point of time, almost any organization with its footprints in technology or with technology being used in the organization, then a cybersecurity framework is generally at play. The next is the COSO ERM. It's about the enterprise risk management for operation compliance risk. The next is the FFIEC cybersecurity assessment tool. This is about cybersecurity maturity used by US financial institutions. So this gives you a perspective, a top view about how or what it looks like. Hence, in a snapshot, we have acts, these are samples for reference, regulations, standards, and framework. Thanks for being with me in this series on Act, Regulations, Standards, and Framework. With this video, what we have covered is the basics of Act, its examples, similarly regulations, standards, and framework. The intent of this video was to create the foundation for our next conversation, which is specific to the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act, wherein we will come across use of these terminologies. Hence, it was thought that let's give a foundation so that when we move into this critical discussion, we have our basis cleared. So thank you very much for being with me till now. And the next video, we will dive into the EU AI Act. It's going to be a long video. We'll try to see whether we can cut it into two or make it one. The idea is post the video. Anyone, whether he's a new joiner to the stream or an experienced hand, we need to ensure that we have given enough perspective on the EU Act, because this is an act which has come into play and in force. Certain aspect of it is required to be adhered to very soon. Hence, it's going to be a challenge, a very big challenge for every subject matter expert in regulations, in ensuring compliances. So stay tight. We will go through that journey together. Again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.